Treasury Department Circular Number 230, Regulations Governing Practice Before the Internal Revenue Service. Subsection A. Subject to Section 500 of Title V, the Secretary of the Treasury may 1. Regulate the practice of representatives of persons before the Department of the Treasury, and 2. Before admitting a representative to practice, require that the representative demonstrate a. Good character, b. Good reputation, c. Necessary qualifications to enable the representative to provide to persons valuable service, and d. Competency to advise and assist persons in presenting their cases. Subsection B. After notice and opportunity for a proceeding, the Secretary may suspend or disbar from practice before the Department or censure a representative who 1. Is incompetent, 2. Is disreputable, 3. Violates regulations prescribed under the section, or 4. With intent to defraud, willfully and knowingly misleads or threatens the person being represented or a prospective person to be represented. The Secretary may impose a monetary penalty on any representative described in the preceding sentence if the representative was acting on behalf of an employer or any firm or other entity in connection with the conduct giving rise to such penalty. The Secretary may impose a monetary penalty on such employer, firm, or entity if it knew or reasonably should have known of such conduct. Such penalty shall not exceed the gross income derived or to be derived from the conduct giving rise to the penalty, and may be in addition to or in lieu of any suspension, disbarment, or censure of the representative. Subsection C. After notice and opportunity for a hearing to any appraiser, the Secretary may 1. Provide that the appraisals by such appraiser shall not have any probative effect in any administrative proceedings before the Department of the Treasury or the Internal Revenue Service, and 2. Bar such appraiser from presenting evidence or testimony in any such proceeding. Subsection D. Nothing in this section or any other provision of law shall be construed to limit the authority of the Secretary of the Treasury to impose standards applicable to the rendering of written advice with respect to any entity, transaction plan or arrangement, or other plan or arrangement, which is of a type which the Secretary determines as having potential for tax avoidance or evasion. Section 10.0 Scope of Part. Subsection A. This part contains rules governing the recognition of attorneys, certified public accountants, enrolled agents, enrolled retirement plan agents, registered tax return preparers, and other persons representing taxpayers before the Internal Revenue Service. Subpart A of this part sets forth rules relating to the authority to practice before the Internal Revenue Service. Subpart B of this part prescribes the duties and restrictions relating to such practice. Subpart C of this part prescribes the sanctions for violating the regulations. Subpart D of this part contains the rules applicable to disciplinary proceedings, and Subpart E of this part contains general provisions relating to the availability of official records. Subsection B. Effective applicability date. This section is applicable beginning August 2nd, 2011. Subpart A. Rules governing authority to practice. Section 10.1. Offices. Subsection A. Establishment of offices. The Commissioner shall establish the Office of Professional Responsibility and any other offices within the Internal Revenue Service necessary to administer and enforce this part. The Commissioner shall appoint the Director of the Office of Professional Responsibility and any other Internal Revenue officials to manage and direct any offices established to administer or enforce this part. Offices established under this part include, but are not limited to: 1. The Office of Professional Responsibility, which shall generally have responsibility for matters related to practitioner conduct and shall have exclusive responsibility for discipline, including disciplinary proceedings and sanctions. And 2. An office with responsibility for matters related to authority to practice before the Internal Revenue Service, including acting on applications for enrollment to practice before the Internal Revenue Service and administering competency testing and obtaining education. Subsection B. Officers and employees within any office established under this part may perform acts necessary or appropriate to carry out the responsibilities of their offices under this part or as otherwise prescribed by the Commissioner. Subsection C. Acting. The Commissioner shall designate an officer or employee of the Internal Revenue Service to perform the duties of an individual appointed under paragraph A of this section in the absence of that officer or employee or during a vacancy in that office. Subsection D. Effective applicability date. This section is applicable beginning August 2nd, 2011, except that paragraph A1 is applicable beginning June 12, 2014. Section 10.2. Definitions. Subsection A. As used in this part, except where the text provides otherwise. 1. Attorney means any person who is a member in good standing of the bar of the highest court of any state, territory, or possession of the United States, including a Commonwealth or the District of Columbia. 2. Certified public accountant means any person who is duly qualified to practice as a certified public accountant in any state, territory, or possession of the United States, including a Commonwealth or the District of Columbia. 3. Commissioner refers to the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue. 4. Practice before the Internal Revenue Service comprehends all matters connected with a presentation to the Internal Revenue Service or any of its officers or employees relating to a taxpayer's rights, privileges, or liabilities under laws or regulations administered by the Internal Revenue Service. Such presentations include, but are not limited to, preparing documents, filing documents, corresponding and communicating with the Internal Revenue Service, rendering written advice with respect to any entity, transaction, plan, or arrangement, or other plan or arrangement having a potential for tax avoidance or evasion, and representing a client at conferences, hearings, and meetings. 5. Practitioner means any individual described in paragraphs A, B, C, D, E, or F of section 10.3. 6. A tax return includes an amended tax return and a claim for refund. 7. Service means the Internal Revenue Service. 8. Tax return preparer means any individual within the meaning of section 7701, subsection A, paragraph 36, and 26 CFR 301.7701-15. Subsection B. Effective applicability date. This section is applicable on August 2nd, 2011. Section 10.3. Who may practice. Subsection A. Attorneys. Any attorney who is not currently under suspension or disbarment from practice before the Internal Revenue Service may practice before the Internal Revenue Service by filing with the Internal Revenue Service a written declaration that the attorney is currently qualified as an attorney and is authorized to represent the party or parties. Notwithstanding the preceding sentence, attorneys who are not currently under suspension or disbarment from practice before the Internal Revenue Service are not required to file a written declaration with the IRS before rendering written advice covered under Section 10.37, but their rendering of this advice is practiced before the Internal Revenue Service. Subsection B. Certified Public Accountants. Any certified public accountant who is not currently under suspension or disbarment from practice before the Internal Revenue Service may practice before the Internal Revenue Service by filing with the Internal Revenue Service a written declaration that the certified public accountant is currently qualified as a certified public accountant and is authorized to represent the party or parties. Notwithstanding the preceding sentence, Certified public accountants who are not currently under suspension or disbarment from practice before the Internal Revenue Service are not required to file a written declaration with the IRS before rendering written advice covered under Section 10.37, but their rendering of this advice is practiced before the Internal Revenue Service. Subsection C. Enrolled agents. Any individual enrolled as an agent pursuant to this part who is not currently under suspension or disbarment from practice before the Internal Revenue Service may practice before the Internal Revenue Service. Subsection D. Enrolled actuaries. 1. Any individual who is enrolled as an actuary by the Joint Board of the Enrollment of Actuaries pursuant to 29 U.S.C. 1242, who is not currently under suspension or disbarment from practice before the Internal Revenue Service may practice before the Internal Revenue Service by filing with the Internal Revenue Service a written declaration stating that he or she is currently qualified as an enrolled actuary and is authorized to represent the party or parties on whose behalf he or she acts. 2. Practice as an enrolled actuary is limited to representation with respect to issues involving the following statutory provisions in Title 26 of the United States Code, Sections 401 relating to qualification of employee plans, 403A relating to whether an annuity plan meets the requirements of Section 404, subsection A, paragraph 2, 404 relating to deductibility of employer contributions, 405 relating to qualification of bond purchase plans, 412 relating to funding requirements for certain employee plans, 413 relating to application of qualification requirements to collectively bargained plans and to plans maintained by more than one employer, 414 relating to definitions and special rules with respect to the employee plan area, 419 relating to treatment of funded welfare benefits, 419 Cap A relating to qualified asset accounts, 420 relating to transfers of excess pension assets to retiree health accounts, 4,971 relating to excise taxes payable as a result of an accumulated funding deficiency under Section 412, 4,972 relating to tax on non-deductible contributions to qualified employer plans, 4,976 relating to taxes with respect to funded welfare benefit plans, 4,980 relating to tax on reversion of qualified plan assets to employer, 6,057 relating to annual registration of plans, 6,058 relating to information required in connection with certain plans of deferred compensation, Section 6,059 relating to periodic report of actuary, Section 6,652, subsection E, relating to the failure to file annual registration and other notifications by pension plan, 6,652, subsection F, relating to the failure to file information required in connection with certain plans of deferred compensation, Section 6,692, relating to the failure to file actuarial report, 7,805, subsection B, relating to the extent to which an Internal Revenue Service ruling or determination letter coming under the statutory provisions listed here will be applied without retroactive effect, and under 29 United States Code Section 1083, relating to the waiver of funding for non-qualified plans. 3. An individual who practices before the Internal Revenue Service pursuant to paragraph D1 of this section is subject to provisions of this part in the same manner as attorneys, certified public accountants, enrolled agents, enrolled retirement plan agents, and registered tax return preparers. Subsection E. Enrolled retirement plan agents. 1. Any individual enrolled as a retirement plan agent pursuant to this part who is not currently under suspension or disbarment from practice before the Internal Revenue Service may practice before the Internal Revenue Service. 2. Practice as an enrolled retirement plan agent is limited to representation with respect to issues involving the following programs: Employee Plans Determination Letter Program, Employee Plans Compliance Resolution System, and Employee Plans Master and Prototype, and Volume Submitter Program. In addition, enrolled retirement plan agents are generally permitted to represent taxpayers with respect to IRS forms under the 53,000 and 55,000 series, which are filed by retirement plans and plan sponsors, but not with respect to actuarial forms or schedules. 3. An individual who practices before the Internal Revenue Service pursuant to paragraph E1 of this section is subject to the provisions of this part in the same manner as attorneys, certified public accountants, enrolled agents, enrolled actuaries, and registered tax return preparers. Subsection F. Registered tax return preparers. 1. Any individual who is designated as a registered tax return preparer pursuant to Section 10.4, subsection C of this part, who is not currently under suspension or disbarment from practice before the Internal Revenue Service may practice before the Internal Revenue Service. 2. Practice as a registered tax return preparer is limited to preparing and signing tax returns and claims for refund and other documents for submission to the Internal Revenue Service. A registered tax return preparer may prepare all or substantially all of a tax return or claim for refund of tax. The Internal Revenue Service will prescribe by forms, instructions, or other appropriate guidance the tax returns and claims for refund that a registered tax return preparer may prepare and sign. 3. A registered tax return preparer may represent taxpayers before revenue agents, customer service representatives, or similar officers and employees of the Internal Revenue Service, including the Taxpayer Advocate Service, during an examination if the registered tax return preparer signed the tax return or claim for refund for the taxable year or period under examination, unless otherwise prescribed by the regulation or notice. This right does not permit such individual to represent the taxpayer, regardless of the circumstances requiring representation before appeals officers, revenue officers, counsel, or similar officers or employees of the Internal Revenue Service or the Treasury Department. A registered tax return preparer's authorization to practice under this part also does not include the authority to provide tax advice to a client or another person except as necessary to prepare a tax return, claim for refund, or other document intended to be submitted to the Internal Revenue Service. 4. An individual who practices before the Internal Revenue Service pursuant to paragraph F1 of this section is subject to the provisions of this part in the same manner as attorneys, certified public accountants, enrolled agents, enrolled retirement plan agents, and enrolled actuaries. Subsection G. Others. Any individual qualifying under paragraph section 10.5 subsection E or section 10.7 is eligible to practice before the Internal Revenue Service to the extent provided in those sections. Subsection H. Government officers and employees and others. An individual who is an officer or employee of the executive, legislative, or judicial branch of the United States government, an officer or employee of the District of Columbia, a member of Congress, or a resident commissioner may not practice before the Internal Revenue Service if such practice violates 18 United States Code Section 203 or 205. Subsection I. State officers and employees. No officer or employee of any state or subdivision of any state whose duties require him or her to pass upon, investigate, or deal with tax matters for such state or subdivision may practice before the Internal Revenue Service if such employment may disclose facts or information applicable to federal tax matters. Subsection J. Effective applicability date. Paragraphs A, B, and G of this section are applicable beginning June 12, 2014. Paragraph C through F, H, and I of this section are applicable beginning August 2nd, 2011.